In October 1982, a man in his early 30s walked into Middlesex Hospital in London and was given a diagnosis that didn't yet have a proper name. He was told he had a virus, that there was no cure, that he had between 3 and 9 months to live. He was given a number, London 1, L1 the first. He is 76 years old, and he's still here. Welcome to Still Here, the podcast from C Magazine about queer history, culture, and the people who shaped it. I'm your host, Leslie Clarke, and Still Here exists because of a simple belief that the stories our community carries deserves to be heard properly. Heard as living, breathing accounts of what it's meant and what it still means to be queer in this world. Today's guest is one of those stories, someone who has continued to show up, to speak out, and to refuse to let the past be forgotten. Jonathan Blake was born in Birmingham in 1949. He trained as an actor, moved to London and was living a full life, working, performing, loving, when the 1980s arrived and changed everything for him and for so many others. In 1982, he became one of the first people in the United Kingdom to be diagnosed with HIV. At the time, it wasn't even called HIV. The outlook, they told him, was bleak. What followed was not a story of quiet acceptance. It was a story of activism, solidarity, loss, survival, and almost a stubborn refusal, I would say, to be defined by a diagnosis that was supposed to be a death sentence. Jonathan was a founding member of Lesbians and Gays Support the Minors, the group whose story was told in the 2014 film Pride, in which he was played by Dominic West. He retrained as a tailor, made costumes for the English National Opera, and spent decades volunteering with HIV support organizations across London. He has been a champion of U equals U. The campaign built on the understanding that an undetectable viral load means the virus cannot be passed on. Mm-hmm. He has given his time, his voice, and his story to anyone who needed to hear it. He lost his partner, Nigel Young, in 2022 after nearly 4 decades together. He has now been living with HIV for more than 40 years, and he has things to say about where we have come from, about where we are now, and what it takes to keep going when the world makes that harder than it should be. Welcome to Still Here. I try to keep it brief, but your life is so rich, it's nearly impossible to keep it brief. Have I forgotten anything you want to add before we dive in?
No, I think we should just dive in.
Yeah?
Because, it's much easier to talk about it than just to have it precede in a strange kind of way.
Yeah. In that case, let's dive in. Take me back to 1982. Who were you? And what was your life then?
Wow. I mean, who was I? I was a jobbing actor who seemed to be spending an inordinate amount of time out of work. I was fortunate in terms that there was a restaurant that had arrived in London called Joe Allen. Joe Allen was renowned in New York for being a restaurant where they said all their waiters were out-of-work actors. So when it arrived in London, I had always worked tables when I was out of work as an actor. So when it arrived in London, I thought, oh yeah, this is the place to be. And I went and asked if, there were any jobs going. And I was an actor and So, if I got a job, I would need to leave, but would I be able to come back? And they said yes to all of that. So I started round about 1978. Whenever I was out of work, I would go back to Joe Allen's. And it was great. I loved it. And I think I enjoyed it because, friends who were working in the West End would come in so you would see your mates. And it was great. And, the stars came and, it was one of those places where they weren't bothered, the sort of the maitre d's and everybody knew, just to leave them be. So I was really fortunate. So, as I say, I would, dip in and out of work. It seemed like it was more out of work than in, but, I had somewhere to be. And that was great.
Marvelous. And you went to a friend's wedding in San Francisco in 1981. What do you remember about that trip?
Oh, well, I mean, first of all, it was amazing. I had, in 1977, 78, I'd lived with this friend of mine, George Hodson, and he lived in a flat in West Brompton, near Brompton Cemetery. And so I'd lived with him. He had been a teacher, had decided that teaching just wasn't for him any longer. And he became a copywriter in advertising. And the very first thing that he did with his art director, they won just awards. And he was hearing, and we were hearing, about what was happening in San Francisco, that there was this, amazing experiment that was happening. And he decided that that's where he was going. He was going to San Francisco. So sold his apartment. So I had to leave. I then found somewhere. I moved into a wonderful Peabody flat in the East End of London in Shadwell. So that was great. And he moved to San Francisco. That was that. I had a really dear friend called Deborah Hower. She was from Berkeley, the other side of the Golden Gate Bridge. And she was getting married.
Lovely.
And she and her husband-to-be decided that they wanted their gay friends, and they had many, to be ushers. So this was a big Jewish wedding. And, in Jewish weddings, they tend to have ushers rather than bridesmaids. So I was one of the ushers. And that was great because I rang up George and, we're talking landline to landline because there are no mobile phones at this point, to say, could I come and stay? And he said, yes. So that was wonderful. So I was going to get to see George, do the wedding, be an usher, and of course, do the steam baths. I have always loved steam baths, and particularly American steam baths. I'd lived in New York in 1974 for like 10 months and done the bathhouses there. So it was great. And of course, I did. And at that point, this is January, February. So it really wasn't until April of that year that anything started to kind of be noticed. And it was at that point in San Francisco that signs for Kaposi's sarcoma and images of Kaposi's sarcoma started. So there was nothing. And I enjoyed the bathhouses. It was wonderful being in San Francisco. It was great seeing George, fabulous wedding. And I came back. And I came back and I did some work, and then I had periods that I was out of work and I was back at Joe Allen's. And at this point, I'm no longer sort of waiting tables, because for me, one of the huge problems was that at 11 or 11:30, you would have to, as a waiter, go round and say to the customers, oh, by the way, it's last orders at the bar. Can I get you any more alcohol? Because we will need to remove the alcohol at midnight. And invariably, people would order sort of 4 bottles of wine, and you knew they weren't going to get through them. So come kind of sort of 11:30, 11:45, you would be sort of just checking on them. And at midnight, you needed to take the bottles, and then there became the battle of the bottles. And you would pick it up, and they would grab it, and there would be this to and fro.
Right.
And I'd had enough of that.
Yeah.
So I just worked in the service bar. So I was giving out the alcohol, but not having to deal with the customers. Anyway, I was working there, and I began to notice that my lymph nodes were beginning to swell, and it reached a point that I was feeling, really unwell, and I needed to leave. I could no longer sort of work there. I was walking like a gorilla.
Right.
The lymph nodes in my groins were kind of exposed, so I was kind of sort of bow-legged, and my arms were out because the lymph nodes sort of all in my breast it was really painful. So I made an appointment to go and see my GP in Shadwell, and I remember walking in, and as I walked in, she put out her hand and said, "Shake my hand." And as she shook it, she felt the lymph node in the crook of my arm. And I went, "Ow, what did you do that for?" And she said, "That's the sailor's handshake. Whenever the sailors would go into port, they would shake the hands of the women or the men they were going with. And if that lymph node was up, it was a sign of syphilis."
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, nor did I. So she said, "Have you had a syphilis test recently?" And I said, "Well, no, I haven't. I've had syphilis, but no, I haven't." So she said, "I suggest that you go and have it checked out."
Mm-hmm.
And I always used to go to the sexual health clinic, I was going to say Clarke clinic, of the Middlesex Hospital, which was called James Pringle House. So I presented myself there, and they were all over me. And literally, I mean, every single lymph node was huge and was painful. And so they were all over me, and they wanted to do a biopsy. So they put me in a side ward. I'm thinking, why am I in a side ward? Obviously, they don't want homosexuality to spread throughout the hospital. It's that
Blimey.
But so I'm in this side ward, and there is somebody also in the side ward who, you can just tell they are, not long for this world.
Mm-hmm.
And I suddenly thought, I think I know this person. And I had met him. I'm sure that I had met him in 1976 when I was out on tour. We'd been doing Othello and Love's Labour's Lost in the open air theatre in Regent's Park.
Right.
And I had met him in Norwich. So there's just that is hovering in the background.
Mm-hmm.
And they do the biopsy, and then they ask me to stay there so they can develop the culture, and then they'll be back.
Okay.
So basically, I'm held there for 2 days, but yeah, I'm perfectly happy to be there. To be honest, I am feeling lousy. Anyway, a couple of days later, they come back and they say, "We have the results. You have a virus. There is no cure. You have between 3 and 9 months to live. Oh, and there will be palliative care." Well, at 33, do you really want to hear about palliative care?
I suppose not.
And then I could go home.
Gosh.
And I don't even remember how I got back to my flat.
Yeah.
It was just homing instinct. But I remember getting back to it and just shutting the door and just collapsing. And I didn't get in touch with anybody. I cut myself off. I felt like a modern day leper, I mean, just wretched.
I mean, that moment is extraordinary, isn't it? When you hear news like that as a young man, and you absolutely didn't expect to, if you went in to that this is a possible outcome. Can you, for for listeners and people who watch this, I mean, they told you had between 3 to 9 months to live.
Mm.
What went through your head in this moment?
To be honest, kind of like nothing. It's so huge. You're just winded. It's like somebody has, that feeling of a punch in the stomach, and just the breath has gone, and that's it. And there is nothing.
Right.
And I really do not remember how I got back.
Yeah.
But, the homing instinct is there. Somehow I got back, and I just literally remember putting the key in the door and closing that door, and that was it. And I just, at that point, then I just collapsed. And, I didn't get in touch with people. I cut myself off. But there is this thing that as human beings, you need people. So kind of I would gather myself up and I would go off to the gay bars that were there. But I would hide in the darkest corner, and I was obviously just putting out, don't you come near me. I mean, what are you going to say? Oh, hi, my name's Jonathan Blake. I got this killer virus coursing through my veins. I mean, there's nothing.
Yeah.
There's nothing.
I mean, you already touched on the time after the diagnosis, how you coped. I mean, you tried to seek being around people. That was your way of coping, I suppose.
Yeah.
In a way.
Yeah, in a way. I mean, I really had it. It wasn't even like coping. It was just, I think it was like not dealing with it.
Right.
Every so often, the Middlesex Hospital would ring me up again, landlines to landlines, because I think it's really important that people understand that life was just very different then, because there wasn't social media. There was, it was magazines, or it was newspapers, or it was telephones, whether it was, going to a call box, or, having a landline. But we had lives,
right?
But I think just that it's very different.
Yeah.
So yeah. I mean, so I don't think that I was really dealing with it at all. One was just kind of, I suppose, waiting. And I say for whatever was going to happen.
Right.
And what was extraordinary, I mean, as I say, the Middlesex Hospital every so often would ring me up and ask me to come in and have MRI scans, because they wanted to see whether or not this virus could get through the blood-brain barrier. I mean, I don't know quite what that means, but sort of, it was one felt at least of use in some strange way. So one would have these MRI scans. And that was basically it. Anyway, sort of, I would pick up copies of this wonderful newspaper called Capital Gay. And Capital Gay was great in terms that it was starting to talk about what was happening in Washington, in San Francisco, in New York, in Paris, Berlin, London, about that there was this disease that seemed to be mainly affecting young gay men. And the more that I read, the more awful, the prospects became. And it reached the point that in the December of that year, I decided that what lay in front of me was just so unappetizing that I was going to take my own life. That was all that I could think about doing. And I really wasn't quite sure how I was going to do it, but somewhere I had read that, if you run a hot bath and you slit your wrists, the kind of bleeding out is less painful. So what I was going to do, I had a bath, So I was going to run a hot bath. I was going to take some pills because I'd got, some Valium, what's the name, have some alcohol. And I was going to slit my wrists, and that would be that. And I had got it all kind of prepared. And then the voice of my mother Golda comes in my head. Jonathan, you clear up your own mess. You don't leave it for others to clear up after you. And I'm thinking, oh, God, I'm going to leave one hell of a... And I couldn't do it, So then you're left with this option, nice Jewish boy, you can't kill yourself, so you better get on and live. But how am I going to get on and live? And again, I am still, not getting in touch with people, going off to the bars, picking up Capital Gay. And one day I see this tiny little advertisement, Gays for a Nuclear-Free Future, are running a coach, leaving at 11 o'clock in the morning from outside Gays the Word on Marchmont Street to go and join a stand together, which has been organised by the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, to form a human chain around Greenham Common, which was the American Air Base and the famous women's camp, and Burfield and Aldermaston, which were the two British nuclear establishments. And they wanted to form a human chain around a 20-kilometre circumference. And I just thought, all right, this is going to be my entry into society. I am going to go and join that demonstration.
And that was probably, well, not just probably, the start of many other involvements. In 1984, you joined the Lesbians and Gays Support the Minors group. How did that happen?
Well, how that happened is basically I went off to go and join this demonstration.
Right.
And I remember leaving Shadwell. I girded my loins, leaving my apartment, got the tube at Shadwell, and I came out at Russell Square tube station. And I remember crossing over the zebra crossing, and I could see the coach outside Gaze the Word. And I got there and I just thought, what the fuck am I doing here? And I literally was turned on my heels to flee. And this voice said, hello, my name's Nigel. Who are you? And I swung round and I see this guy wearing green Wellington boots, crimson and ochre pantaloons, a crimson Fair Isle singlet, and this mop of black curly hair. And I just went, oh, Jonathan. And we walked off to the coach together. That changed everything. It was amazing. He was introducing me to all his friends on the coach. And there were a few people that I knew. Anyway, we joined this stand together. It was amazing. Came back. And at the end of it, I said to him, why don't you come and have tea with me the next day? Because I was knackered. He was going off to some party at Noel Gregg's, and I can't do that. It's been enough. I've done this extraordinary thing. And off I went home. And the next day, he arrives with a bunch of anemones and 2 jam donuts. He's brought tea.
Oh, lovely.
And he says to me, you're living isolated in the East End. I know someone who would like to sublet your flat. I know a squat in Brixton. Why don't we move in together? And I just thought, I've got 2 months to live. Why not?
And did he know? You had that conversation about moving in.
Well, I told him about my diagnosis. It seemed to make no difference to him.
Okay.
So that was that. So we did. So we moved in. And he'd always been very politically active. He'd been a member of the Gay Left Collective. So when Lesbian and Gay Men Support the Minors was formed in 1984, it was obvious that we were going to join it.
Of course.
And so join it we did. But before that, what had happened was that we had been in this squat for 3 months. Yeah. He knew the matriarch of the squat. Basically, there'd been an incident, we had to leave. She'd thrown us out of the squat. But he had lived in Brixton in 1981, at the time of the uprising. And so he knew of these squats that had become a housing cooperative. And within that housing cooperative, there were 8 houses, 5 on Relton Road, 3 on Mail Road, that was a lesbian and gay squat. They had been instrumental in forming Brixton Housing Co-op.
Right.
And so he'd heard that there were 2 rooms going in 146 Mail Road. So we went up with our bags, and luckily enough, the rooms were available. So we sat and had tea and chatted and chatted and chatted. And they said, yeah, you can join the housing cooperative. And for me, that was amazing, because not only have I met this guy, so there are all kinds of things happening, but suddenly I'm part of this housing cooperative, and I can get involved with it, because my way now of dealing with this virus is if I keep busy, so busy, I haven't got time to think that I'm going to be dead. Yeah. So it's what I call displacement activity. You just displace everything into being busy, forget about the virus. And that became basically my way of coping.
And busy you were indeed. You were also fundraising.
Well, yeah, I mean, in a way, that all happened just because of becoming part of Lesbian and Gay Support the Minors. I mean, that's, all these things. And what is so extraordinary is I don't even know how this happened. It just happened. I mean, and I don't know whether it's, my karma. I mean, I really don't know. But whatever happened, I've just been amazingly fortunate in these things that just kept happening. So, meeting Nigel, as I say, completely changed everything. And then because of him being politically active, we get politically active. Then on top of that, there is also Ken Livingstone. Mm-hmm. Ken Livingstone, who was the leader of the GLC, the Greater London Council. The Greater London Council was kind of on the south bank of the Thames, diagonally opposite the House of Parliament where Thatcher was. It was run by the Labour, basically the Labour Party, Ken Livingstone. They had control of education in London, the Inner London Education Authority. And Ken Livingstone had this amazing policy, which was actually 1985, but that if you were unemployed and out of work, you could pay £1, and for 12 months you could do any number of courses at City Lit, Morley College, any of the other education places. Yes. And that's basically how eventually I became a tailor. But, we've still got all of 1984 and Lesbian and Gay Men Supporting the Minors. And that was the fundraiser, this group of people. And what's really interesting is that because we all thought that the story would die with us. But we made, we collected, well, actually something like £20,000, which in 1984 is pretty substantial, for this community in South Wales. Now, the reason that we twinned with this community in South Wales was that Mark Ashton, who with Mike Jackson founded Lesbian and Gay Men Support the Minors, was a member of the Communist Party. The Communist Party, or the Young Communists, had already got a connection with this community in South Wales. So it was obvious that here was an ideal opportunity, because there was already an opening through the communists, that this is where we would twin. And that's how it's happened. This is never mentioned in the film because, of course, the idea of communists being involved in anything would completely rule it out ever getting to North America, certainly the US. So that's kind of parked and put on the side. I think that in the film there's somebody who shouts out at Mark at one point, commie bastard. So that's about the only mention of the Communist Party. But for us, we thought this story was absolutely just, going to die with us. And what happened was that there was a small group of members of Lesbian and Gay Men Sport the Miners who had made a documentary, which is still around, called Framed Youth, really, famous. And Jimmy Somerville was in Framed Youth. Anyway, Mark and Jimmy were mates. And at one point, we needed something to do to raise more funds. And it was decided that we would create this concert, which was going to happen. It happened in December, I think 10th of December, 1984, at the Electric Ballroom, called Pits and Perverts. And Jimmy Somerville was going to kind of sort of be the lead. And at this point, Jimmy Somerville is just at the point that he's about to become this, megastar. So he is top of the bill. So that's kind of, where the fundraising, or at this point, comes in.
Gosh. And I mean, bearing in mind, you've been doing all of this while still coming to terms with your diagnosis. How did you, in the rare, quiet moments, how did you hold all of this?
I'm not sure that I did hold it. I think that I kind of just pushed it back, and it wasn't going to happen, or I wasn't going to let it happen. Mm-hmm. Or, I mean, really, it was this thing that everything was so new. So suddenly, I am part of this housing cooperative, this lesbian and gay sort of community. So, there is a community around. And of course, there is also a huge amount of grief because, friends of Nigel's were dying. I get a message that my friend George Hodson, who in a way I'd kind of lost contact with him because he'd been in San Francisco and then got disenchanted with San Francisco because he felt that what was suddenly happening there was that it was all sex and drugs and the politics had disappeared. And he'd got into advertising there, and then he moved to Australia. And so, we'd kind of lost contact. And, if you're not writing letters and postcards and things, there isn't internet, there isn't. So, we had. Anyway, I get a message. It's a bit later on, sort of 86 now, that he is in the London Lighthouse and on death's door. So we reconnect, but this is sort of now 86. So we're running, I don't know how you want the chronology to.
No, I mean, this is pretty much, I mean, it's I mean, the 80s were jam-packed with different events for you and entering a new period.
Yeah.
And you already touched on it. I mean, basically the 1980s meant watching friends die.
Yeah.
Can I ask about, because this is so surreal from my perspective, because I never lived through anything like that. Probably the most recent event that is in some way probably pivotal was COVID, but obviously it wasn't affecting my circle of friends as much.
Yeah.
How have you learned to carry it? How can you actually learn to carry it?
I'm not sure that you can learn to carry it. I think that what I think, and this is where I think community is so important, and one learned so much about that, from being the part of this community that had joined, with another community. So being a part of Lesbian and Gay Men Support the Minors, you are part of this team, this community. You go down and you are supporting these are remarkable people, these minors who, we would go down, and the generosity of spirit and the kindness that they kind of gave to us, in response to our supporting them was just extraordinary, and the hardships that they're dealing with. But the women, they are such a power base, and they are extraordinary. And then when you think about, what happened after the strike, when, there has just been, Thatcher has just laid waste, not just to South Wales, but to communities up and down the country. And yet these people offered such amazing support. So, the very fact that it was the South Wales miners who put pressure on the National Union of Miners to use their block vote to get lesbian and gay rights into the Labour Party manifesto. And people had been trying this for years. But this time, the National Union of Miners got other unions to also use their block vote. And in 1985, lesbian and gay rights was voted into the Labour Party manifesto at that conference. And then, we have to wait until 1997 and Tony Blair's government comes into office. And eventually, round about 2000, 2001, we get civil partnerships. And there is a direct, connection between the trade union movement, giving lesbian and gays the rights. And it's never talked about, Unions are trashed, but unions are just communities. Yeah. And this is where sort of, it's when communities can come together, they can do such amazing things. But communities are often sort of just kept apart, So it's really really important, and I think that we forget this. We live in such an atomized world because of we're sitting by ourselves with our computers, and when you get out on the street and join a demonstration, it is fantastic. Just that energy that there is when you are with other people.
Speaking of forgetting, you said that HIV is a forgotten epidemic that will happen between COVID and the Spanish flu in terms of public memories, almost if it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Is there something that does it still frustrate you?
Oh yeah, really. And what is, and I don't understand it. In 1987, the government produced this, what I consider to be horrendous, and I don't know what you call it. It was a health campaign, which was to warn about the dangers of HIV in the same way that happened with COVID. And the words that John Hurt spoke on this thing, this is a virus, it can affect anybody. But the right-wing press weaponized it in the same way that they had weaponized it in America. And it was almost about the fact that gay liberation had made such strides that they were going to take us down. So they weaponized it to the point that this was a gay disease. I mean, how ridiculous, that a virus goes, oh, you're heterosexual, we won't touch you. It's a bit like kind of, Moses and the lamb's blood on the doors of the Jewish homes, and the angel of death passed them by. It's a great story, but viruses don't behave that way. But it was weaponized, and so it became this gay disease, and it was something that we'd brought upon ourselves, because of our lifestyles and what have you. And it's a nonsense, but somehow it stuck. And I remembered what was extraordinary about Norman Fowler, who was the health minister under Thatcher, was that he understood the threat from HIV and from a virus. And he went to the States to kind of find out, what was happening, because in a way they were more advanced. It seemed to be sort of, more, I don't know, sort of, there were more people who were sort of presenting there. And he realized that this really was something which was going to affect everybody. So he told Margaret Thatcher that there was HIV in the heterosexual community in Edinburgh. What he didn't tell her was that it was in the heterosexual intravenous drug users, because she would probably have said, "I'll let them die." In the same way that basically, she, like Reagan, was not interested in it because it was this, say, gay plague, or in their head that it was. So he knew that by saying that, basically the floodgates in terms of money was open. Mm-hmm. And he was extraordinary, because what he did was that he gave money to Big Pharma to research and develop something, whether it was about medication or what it was. But he also gave money to drop-in centres. So places like this London Lighthouse that had been privately funded and privately built, that had this amazing hospice on the fifth floor where people could go and die with dignity, was extraordinary. And so there were all these drop-in centres. There were places like Body Positive that was down here in Brighton, and in London there was the London Lighthouse. There was a place that I used to go and volunteer at, called the Landmark, which was in Brixton, Tulse Hill. There was Food Chain, and Food Chain still exists. So there were all these places that were there to support people living with HIV and AIDS. And of course, yes, initially it was essentially gay men that were presenting, but very soon it was Black African women who were presenting. And then one was having to deal with the fact that here were these other people, and you had to kind of learn to kind of share, and they had different stories from ours. And of course, there is within the sort of, Black communities this kind of abhorrence of homosexuality, and they are having to deal with meeting gay men and dealing with that. And they were extraordinary and amazing times, so you learned so much.
And I mean, we are still very much on a learning journey when it comes to HIV and how we deal with it. Yeah. And we will touch on stigma in just a minute. Mm-hmm. I just want to go back to a part of your story, because you are pretty much a trailblazer when it comes to talking about your life with HIV publicly. I want to come back quickly to the film, right? And the fact that obviously the film gave a lot of awareness to your personal story and to your status. Did you have any say in it?
No, basically, I remember that Stephen Beresford, who wrote the film, what happened was that Stephen Beresford had been at RADA, the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, in 1993 when John Major was closing the remainder of the pits that Thatcher hadn't closed. And his partner had said something like, or I think Stephen had said, why aren't people out on the street demonstrating? And his partner said, well, he explained about lesbian and gay men support the miners. And Stephen felt that he was being patronised. This could not possibly be true. The idea that gay men and lesbians are coming out on the street and going supporting miners, and why would they support miners? I mean, it seemed to be, complete nonsense, and he felt he was being patronised and he wasn't having it and, walked out, basically. But it stayed with him. And so when computers began to become more kind of accessible, and we're talking about like sort of 2000, he thought, could this be true? So he tapped in lesbian and gay men support the miners, and up pops this 27-minute documentary called All Out, Dancing in Lies, and you can still find it on YouTube. And there was this whole story. But there were talking heads with no names underneath it. Mm. So he basically had to wait till the end of the 27 minutes. And he knew that if he hit on the name Mike Jackson, because of Michael Jackson, he'd just be off down a kind of wormhole. So he had to find an unusual name. And this name, Reggie Blennerhassett, just came up. So he went to Facebook. I'd never thought of this. He went to Facebook and found a Reggie Blennerhassett and got in contact with him and said, were you a member of Lesbian and Gay Men Support the Miners? And Reggie responded to say yes. And they met. And Reggie kind of basically vetted him so that he understood the politics of it. And he felt that Stephen did. So he then passed him to Mike Jackson. And Mike Jackson had co-founded Lesbian and Gay Men Support the Miners. Mike Jackson had met Mark Ashton at Switchboard, Gay Switchboard. Mark had actually trained Mike. And between them, they formed Lesbian and Gay Men Support the Miners. And so this was it. Mark... Sorry. It's okay. Mark was one of the early casualties from the HIV pandemic. Basically, Mark was sharing a flat, and a friend of his, Ashtar, took him to St. Thomas's Hospital, and 10 days later he died. So he was an early casualty. But what is extraordinary is that there is a garden in Paris, in the 5th arrondissement, which is very apt because the 5th arrondissement was always run by the communists. There is a garden which is surrounds their Bibliothèque Nationale, called Jardin Maison Lemanier Mark Ashton. And that's just incredible. So there are all these things that have come out of, what he did, this, and he was extraordinary in terms that he was very kind of charismatic. So yeah, but as I say, he died literally 1987, I think, age 26. And I remember kind of when the film came out, and we were invited to a screening of it just before they were taking it to Cannes, because Cannes was the place that films get sold. And when it came to the end of it, and it was really difficult watching it, because I kind of had, it felt like the weight of all the members of LGSM who had died sitting on one's shoulders. And this is, 2014. But it got to the end of it, and there was something that he had said about me. It was almost like I was the only person that had ever died from HIV. I mean, and I flew to him and said, "You can't say that. You just can't say that." So when the credits went up, it mentions Mark and it mentions Sean, and then suddenly it mentions, and Jonathan, he's just turned 60 or whatever it was. I was so relieved. But I was outed. I was globally outed. And in a way, I suppose I should have been kind of, I don't know, shocked. But when I'd worked at or volunteered at the Landmark, I remember that the Terence Higgins Trust had sent round a kind of request for anybody who was prepared to be photographed, because they wanted to run a campaign aimed at gay men around safer sex. This was 1996. And I thought, I've been an actor. I can do that. So I said, yeah, I'm happy to do that. And when it happened, the photograph that was taken by Gideon Memdel, this wonderful photographer, happened to be the one that was chosen to be kind of sort of on all of London transport buses, huge billboards. And I remember kind of going to Clapham North tube station, and I walked down into it, and there are these, and I don't know what you call them, the billboard size, but whether it's A200 or how the size works. But there were 3 huge photographs of me, billboard side, on the south side of the station. And it's an island platform, and 3 huge billboards on the north side. And I just thought, there's one too many Jonathan Blakes in this. And I fled. And I suddenly thought, oh my God, it's on all of London transport. It's on the tubes. It's on the buses. And I used to, and still do, go to Porchester Hall, to the steam baths. I love steam baths, talked about it. I mean, these are different steam baths because, they're not queer, they're not gay. You have to behave yourself.
I see.
But I schmeiched there. And I just thought, what have I done? Because suddenly, what it basically said, something like, Jonathan has been living with HIV for whatever it was, sort of 15 years. It's not always easy for him to practice safe sex. So it's showing that it's not easy, but it's important. Anyway, so I thought, I've just outed myself to anybody who's traveling on the thing. And I remember going to the bars, and somebody said, I saw your picture on the bus. It was great. And that was it. So then when I'm globally outed, I just think, that's fine. It'll be what it'll be. And actually it's a relief, because I talk about it and I want to talk about it. And I think it's important to talk about it. And what happened then afterwards, Patrick Cash, who basically was the writer in residence at 56 Dean Street. And I think how amazing, to have a sexual health clinic where you've got a writer in residence that so he had got in touch with me to say he did these conversations and about HIV and would I like to have one with him? And I said, oh God, I'd be really happy to talk about it because I'm happy to talk about it. So we met over, 4.5 hours around Soho where, he could find out about me and we could then have this conversation. And we had this conversation in the Medi-Cinema of the Chelsea and Westminster Hospital. And it was great. And I was talking about the Concord trial, because the Concord trial was this trial that they were wanting to find out about the efficacy of AZT. And what we never knew about AZT was that it was actually a failed chemotherapy drug. And chemotherapy drugs work in the way, or the old ones used to work in the way, that when you take them, they wipe out your immune system, hopefully taking the cancer with it. But they wipe out your immune system. Well, that is what the virus is doing, but the virus is gently nibbling away. This drug comes in and just wipes it out.
Like a bomb.
Like a bomb. And leaves you open to any opportunistic infection. And it was either PCP, pneumocystic pneumonia, so that you drown in your own lungs, or CMV retinitis and you go blind and then sort of, it gets into the brain. I mean, these opportunistic infections were horrendous. And it was the opportunistic infections that killed the, people. It wasn't necessarily the drug, but, this particular drug did, because it just left you with nothing. So it was difficult. Anyway, and what they said, what had happened was that the Middlesex Hospital had closed down. The Middlesex Hospital, where there is the famous handshake that when Diana, with gloveless, meets and shakes hand with an HIV/AIDS patient in one of their wards. This hospital is closed down. It's prime real estate. And we were all moved to Mortimer Market. Mortimer Market was part of University College Hospital. And they were amazing. It was really great. But they said, would I like to be part of the cohort? And when they explained it, they said, we have a cohort, we cut it in two, one half gets the pill and one half gets the placebo. And I said, well, hold on a minute. Don't you pair us up so that someone who's a similar metabolism to me or build as me, we're paired up and then one of us gets the pill and the other gets the placebo. And they went, oh, no, that's far too complicated. And I just saw red. And I thought, no, if you can't be bothered to pair us up, I can't be bothered to do your trial. So I didn't. And I never touched AZT. And I think one of the reasons that I'm still here is that I didn't. I can't prove it.
Yeah.
But I didn't. But what that meant was that suddenly I was considered to be the difficult patient. So suddenly I never saw the same registrar when I went in. And you're going in almost every 2 weeks to have your blood, because the only way that they could tell whether you had the virus was about your CD4 counts. That was kind of how because, up until 1996, that was it. The really interesting thing is that in 1997, we got viral load testing. And with viral load testing, suddenly they could tell how much virus you had got in your body. And that was the huge, huge game changer. And when I say that that HIV is this forgotten epidemic. You know, it isn't talked about. Yeah. I mean, which is so extraordinary. And I'm sure that part of it is that we don't deal very well with sex in this country. And because it is considered to be a sexually transmitted virus, maybe that's why. But it's a virus. And actually, it's bloodborne. So it's passed by blood. It's not about like COVID, where it's in the water droplets, you know. So it's very different. So because it was sexually transmitted and because it had been considered gayed up, maybe that's why it isn't. But if it hadn't been for HIV, you know, viral load testing in 1997, there would have been no PCR tests for COVID. But do they ever make the connection? No. It's incredible.
Can I ask you, because I mean, we could probably carry on for the rest of the day. It's so interesting. No. It's so interesting to really drill down and hear what it was like, especially for someone and you know who didn't live through it.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up, I've got one question for you, because I find, you know, you already touched on some of the milestones in terms of research and where we are now is a wildly different position and environment.
Oh yeah.
Seeing, unfortunately, the spikes of new infections more in heterosexual communities rather than homosexual communities.
Yeah.
It's definitely an indicator. But we are lucky to have access to PrEP, etc.
Well, we're also, you know, incredibly fortunate that we still have a National Health Service.
Very true.
Because you know, the very fact that once I was diagnosed, you know, there was access to all kinds of things. And at the moment, and this is really important, that anybody in this country, you know, whether they're a refugee, whatever their status is, if they present with HIV, they are given treatment, you know, whereas, you know, in the States, you have to pay for it. You know, there are now the generics, which are as good as the kind of sort of patented drugs. And you know, what drives me mad is the fact that big pharma patent drugs and then push the price up.
Yeah.
And I just think, hold on a minute. It was a Tory government that gave you money. Why are you charging the NHS so much for that? But that's another story.
You almost, I mean, that was sort of half my question.
All right.
Because in light of what happens in the United States, the Trump administration wrapping up US AID, stopping HIV research, stopping the funding. Now the new budget is out. It's not looking particularly healthy on that front. What is your message to governments around the world when it comes to HIV research and investing into it?
Well, basically, my message is to them that they need to invest. You know, we glibly in this country talk about, you know, we're hoping that by 2030 we can have no new HIV infection. And you just think, really? The fact that, you know, this country has also cut its aid budget. But the biggest thing is that man in the White House, you know, cut US aid. And that so the effect that it is having on, you know, Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, you know, just in general, but even in the States, they are now finding that there is a rise in HIV within the States, you know, whereas it was beginning to be suppressed, as you say. It is you know, being seen, you know, nowadays more in the heterosexual community. And of course, what it is heterosexual women will, because again, I come back to this thing that we are not, certainly in this country, we are not good, and particularly I think men are not good about dealing with sex and the possibility of sexual health infections. You know, it was always left for the women to sort of to get protection in terms of not getting pregnant, so the pill, rather than men using condoms. You know, so it's always been kind of left to the women, and the women are presenting, and women are finding it more difficult to get PrEP. You know, gay men can access it, but what about heterosexual men? They don't even know about it. So it's really important that it is talked about, and that governments, because governments are the places where, you know, they have the budgets, that they need to be dealing with this issue, because, you know, it's still around, and there is no cure. There is no virus yet. There no vaccine yet. You know, they're working on it. But it's really interesting that it has taken 40 years. And it's taken 40 years because HIV is a really extraordinary virus. It learns to mutate. So that, you know, if you stop your medication and that's it, and then you restart it, that's fine. But if you kind of take it some days and you don't take it others, you can gradually, the virus can build up a resistance to that, and suddenly there's a whole line of medication that you can't have. So it's really important that people adhere. And there are lots of reasons why people don't adhere, and then that's difficult, and we have to learn to deal with those people and help them. Because, you know, one of the things, you know, I'm on one pill a day, you know, whereas before, at times there were some people who were having to take the medication like 5 or 6 times a day. You know, we've got down to the point that it's one pill a day, but you've got to adhere. And there are even, we've reached the point that there are people who are having injectables, you know, and it could be like, you know, 2 jabs in the bum, a bit like syphilis, but, you know, nonetheless, you know, you'd go to hospital to have it done. But, you know, you could have that and it could last 6 months, or it may even last a year. I mean, the ways that, you know, Big Pharma have started to deal with it, making money, but is incredible. And also, you know, there are the generics. And South Africa is, you know, somewhere that makes them. You know, South America, they make the generics. So they exist. So it is extraordinary where we've come. I mean, and like really exciting. And the fact that I've lived through all of that is kind of mind-boggling.
And we're glad to still have you with us, and many, many, many more years to come. It's been such a pleasure to have you on, and I think we covered a lot of ground. And actually, we should plan a part 2, because there are so many questions I didn't get to ask. But thank you so much.
Pleasure.